So today we're going to talk about solving equations using multiplication and division. We originally learned that inverse operation meant the opposite operation. So when we talked about adding, the inverse was subtracting. Subtracting, the inverse is adding. So now we're working with multiplication and division. The inverse operation for multiplication is division, and division is multiplication. Make sure that you pause the video as needed and you title your page Solving Equations Using Multiplication and Division, and make sure you title your table of contents too. You can pause at any time if needed to keep up. So my first problem I have is 4x equals 24. We have a coefficient and a variable together. When we have that, that means it's multiply. 4 times x is what this means. So if I ask you what the inverse operation is, 4 times, the inverse operation would be to divide by 4. So I would divide both sides by 4, because whatever I do on one side, I must do on the other. Well, 4 divided by 4 cancels out and just leaves us with 1x. And again, just like we talked, that 1 is there, it's just invisible. And 24 divided by 4 equals 6. So if I were to do my check, right, if I were to do my check, I rewrite my equation for x, 4 times x equals 24. I plug in my value for my variable, so it becomes 4 times 6 equals 24. And then 4 times 6 is 24 equals 24, and that checks out. And again, it's really important that you write that. And again, the coefficient and variable, this means to multiply. Let's try another problem. Here I have 8b, which means 8 times b, equals 72. Since it's multiplication, the inverse operation for multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to divide both sides by 8, because again, our goal is to get b to be alone. Well, 8 divided by 8 leaves us with just one b. Oops. And 72 divided by 8 equals 9. So b equals 9. But let's go ahead and do our check. So I'm rewriting the equation, right? 8b equals 72. I'm just rewriting it. And then now it's 8 times, plug in my value for my variable, 8 times 9. Does 8 times 9 equal 72? Well, 8 times 9, 72 equals 72, and that checks out. So these are examples of when you have a multiplication using the inverse operation of division. But what if we had a division problem? Sketch papers here. What if I were to give you 3 equals p divided by 70? So now when we're looking at this, it's not a fraction. We're talking about a division problem, right? This is a division. And the division problem, well, what's my inverse operation for dividing? The inverse operation for dividing is multiplying. So again, I need to get p alone. So I have to divide, since it's dividing, I have to multiply both sides by 70. Well, okay, so I have p divided by 70 times 70. Now, since it looks like a fraction, we're gonna make it into fraction form, 70 over 1. And when we cross cancel, I can cross cancel. 70 goes into 70 one time, 70 goes into 70 one time. So really, I'm left with P times 1 is P, and 1 times 1 is 1, and anything over 1 is itself. So I'm just left with P there. And then on this side, 70 times 3, well, 7 times 3 is 21, and add my 0, so P equals 210. So to get rid of that 70, let's recap. So it's P divided by 70, so I multiplied by 70, and I put 70 over 1, I cross-canceled, and I'm left with P. To check my work, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite my equation. 3 equals, and it's P over 70, but this time we're going to plug in our value for our variable. So I have 3 equals, this time it's 210, it's going to go right there, 210 over 70. And when I divide 210 divided by 70, I can look and see, oh, I have 2 zeros there, so those can cross out. What's 21 divided by 7? Well, 21 divided by 7 is 3. So 3 equals 3, and it checks out, and our P equals 10 is correct. This time we have a decimal problem, and I have D divided by 54 equals 2.5. So D divided by 54 equals 2.5. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, since it's D divided by 54, I'm going to multiply by 54 on both sides. Well, like we said, this cancels out here, and we're left with just our D. And then if we were to do 2.5 times 54, just for time's sake, it equals 135. So D equals 135. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check my answer here. And so I rewrite my equation just as I saw it. D divided by 54 equals 2.5. And this time I'm plugging my value of 135 into D. So I have 135 divided by 54 equals 2.5. Well, 135 divided by 54, if I did that in my calculator, it's 2.5 equals 2.5, and that checks out. So there you have it. Solving equations using multiplication and division. The inverse operation for multiplying is dividing, and dividing is multiplying, and you can see these just cancel out, and you're left with D alone.